March 10, 1968, Nashville, Tennessee was a city caught between two worlds. While most of America was embracing the civil rights movement and racial integration was becoming the norm, Nashville's music scene remained stubbornly segregated. At the heart of this resistance stood the Grand Ole Opry Club, a massive venue that had been whites only since 1918. The club's owner, Billy Ray Thompson, was a 58-year-old man who represented everything old about the South. His grandfather had fought for the Confederacy, his father had built the club during the era of Jim Crow laws, and Billy Ray had spent his entire adult life maintaining what he called Southern musical traditions. This meant white country artists performed for white audiences, while black musicians were relegated to smaller venues on the other side of town. Billy Ray took pride in never having allowed a single black performer on his stage. He'd turned down requests from Ray Charles, James Brown, even Louis Armstrong. "The Grand Ole Opry Club," he would say, "is for real American music, played by real Americans for real American audiences." The venue was undeniably impressive. With a capacity of 2,000, it was the largest music hall in Tennessee. The stage was massive, the acoustics perfect, and the club's reputation drew top country and rock acts from across America. But it also served as a symbol of the segregation that still plagued the American South. That changed on March 10th, when Billy Ray's booking agent, a young man named Tommy Stevens, made what would become the most consequential mistake of his career. Tommy had been handling bookings for the club for only 3 months. He was eager to prove himself by bringing in bigger acts and more revenue. When he received a call from a London-based promotion company about booking an exciting new rock act that's taking America by storm, Tommy was intrigued. The caller described Jimi Hendrix as the most innovative guitarist in the world and a sensation with young audiences everywhere. They mentioned his appearances on major television shows, his chart success, and the fact that he was commanding top dollar at venues across the country. What the caller didn't explicitly mention, and what Tommy didn't think to ask, was Jimi Hendrix's race. Tommy, who had grown up in Nashville and understood the music business primarily through country and mainstream rock, had never heard of Jimi Hendrix. The name didn't immediately signal anything to him about the artist's background. When the promotion company offered a substantial fee, more than the club typically paid for most acts, Tommy saw an opportunity to impress Billy Ray with his negotiating skills. He booked Jimi Hendrix for March 15, 1968, without consulting Billy Ray or doing any research about the artist. A contract was signed, deposits were paid, and advertisements were placed in local newspapers announcing the Jimi Hendrix Experience live at the Grand Ole Opry Club. Only then did Tommy decide to actually listen to Jimmy's music to better understand what kind of show they'd be hosting. When Tommy heard Purple Haze for the first time, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. Not only was Jimi Hendrix black, but his music was unlike anything that had ever been performed at the Grand Ole Opry Club. This wasn't country music, wasn't traditional rock and roll, wasn't anything that Billy Ray Thompson would consider real American music. This was psychedelic rock, experimental and wild, performed by a black artist who had achieved fame by appealing to white audiences. Tommy knew he had to tell Billy Ray, but he kept putting off the conversation, hoping he could find a way out of the contract or somehow convince Billy Ray that the booking could work. For 3 days he agonized over how to break the news. Billy Ray discovered the truth on his own when a customer at the club asked him if he was excited about the upcoming Jimi Hendrix show. Billy Ray had no idea what the customer was talking about, but when he asked Tommy for details, the whole story came tumbling out. Billy Ray's reaction was volcanic. He screamed at Tommy for 20 minutes, calling him everything from incompetent to a traitor to Southern values.
When he finally calmed down enough to think clearly, Billy Ray made his position crystal clear. "No psychedelic freak is playing in my establishment. I don't care what contracts were signed or what money was paid. This club has been whites only for 50 years, and it's going to stay that way. Cancel the show." But Tommy had terrible news. The contracts were ironclad, and canceling would result in massive financial penalties that could bankrupt the club. Worse, the story had already been picked up by music industry publications, and canceling now would generate exactly the kind of negative publicity that Billy Ray had always avoided. Billy Ray was trapped. He could either honor the contract and allow a black performer to break the club's 50-year color barrier, or he could cancel and face financial ruin and national humiliation. For 2 days, Billy Ray raged and plotted, looking for any way out of the situation. He consulted lawyers who told him the contracts were valid. He called other venue owners, hoping to find someone willing to take over the booking, but no one wanted to get involved in what was clearly becoming a racial controversy. Finally, Billy Ray made a decision that he thought would solve his problem. He would honor the contract technically, but make it impossible for Jimmy to actually perform. He announced new security requirements for the March 15th show. All performers would need to submit to background checks, drug tests, and moral character evaluations. He was confident that Jimi Hendrix, with his wild appearance and psychedelic reputation, would never pass these arbitrary requirements. When word of Billy Ray's new requirements reached Jimmy's management, their response was swift and decisive. Instead of trying to comply with the obviously discriminatory demands, they decided to fight back by turning the controversy into a broader statement about civil rights and artistic freedom. Jimmy's manager called a press conference for March 13, 2 days before the scheduled show. Standing before a room full of journalists, he read a prepared statement. The Grand Ole Opry Club's attempt to prevent Jimi Hendrix from performing is not about drugs or background checks, it's about race. This venue has maintained a whites-only policy for 50 years, and it's going to stay that way. Cancel the show.
The press conference made national news. Civil rights organizations immediately rallied to Jimmy's support. The NAACP announced they would bus protesters from across the South to Nashville for the March 15 show. Local college students organized demonstrations. Even white rock fans, many of whom had never thought much about segregation, began expressing outrage that their favorite new guitarist was being discriminated against. Billy Ray found himself at the center of a national controversy. Reporters camped outside his club, asking pointed questions about his segregation policies. Civil rights leaders denounced him on national television. Music industry publications wrote scathing editorials about venues that still practiced racial discrimination. The pressure was overwhelming, but Billy Ray remained defiant. In an interview with the Nashville Banner, he declared, "I built this club to showcase real American music for real American audiences. I'm not going to let some psychedelic freak from London destroy everything my family has worked for." The reference to Jimmy as being from London revealed Billy Ray's ignorance about the artist's background, but it also highlighted his strategy. He was trying to frame it as a conflict between American values and foreign influences, rather than acknowledging the racial discrimination at its core. By March 14, the day before the scheduled show, downtown Nashville was in chaos. Hundreds of protesters had arrived from across the South, setting up camps in nearby parks. Counter-protesters, mostly older white residents who supported Billy Ray's position, organized their own demonstrations. The city had to call in additional police to maintain order. The story had grown beyond music or even civil rights. It had become a symbol of the broader cultural conflicts tearing America apart in 1968. On one side were those who wanted to preserve traditional racial hierarchies and cultural boundaries. On the other were those demanding change, integration, and artistic freedom. On March 15, Jimi Hendrix arrived in Nashville with his band and a determination to perform regardless of the obstacles. When he saw the crowds of supporters gathered outside the Grand Ole Opry Club, he made a decision that would define his legacy beyond music. Instead of trying to sneak into the venue or negotiate privately with Billy Ray Thompson, Jimi decided to make a public statement. He walked directly to the club's main entrance, where Billy Ray had stationed security guards with instructions to turn him away. The confrontation was captured by dozens of news cameras and photographers. Billy Ray himself came to the door to face Jimi directly. "You're not performing in my club," Billy Ray said, his voice carrying across the crowd of protesters and reporters. Jimi's response was calm but firm. "Music belongs to everyone." 4 words that would become legendary in the civil rights movement. "Music belongs to everyone," Jimi repeated, louder this time so the crowd could hear. "You can try to keep me out of your building, but you can't keep music segregated. Music is bigger than your prejudice." The crowd erupted in cheers. But Jimi wasn't finished. He pulled out his guitar, the same Fender Stratocaster he'd used to revolutionize rock music, and began playing right there on the sidewalk. What started as a protest became the most powerful concert of Jimi's career. Standing on the steps of the Grand Ole Opry Club, denied entry to the venue, Jimi performed for nearly 2,000 people who packed the surrounding streets. He played Purple Haze, Hey Joe, and The Wind Cries Mary, his guitar amplified by portable speakers that protesters had brought. But the most powerful moment came when Jimi played his electrifying version of the Star-Spangled Anthem. His interpretation of the national anthem, filled with feedback and distortion that echoed the chaos of the Vietnam War and the civil rights struggle, became an instant symbol of American complexity and contradiction. As Jimi played, something remarkable happened in the crowd. The protesters, both black and white, began singing along. Even some of Billy Ray's supporters, watching from the club's windows, found themselves moved by the music. The artificial barriers that had divided Nashville's music scene for 50 years began crumbling in real time. The impromptu concert lasted 2 hours. By the time Jimi finished, even the Nashville police officers assigned to maintain order were applauding. The only person who remained unmoved was Billy Ray Thompson, who watched from his club's doorway with growing desperation. After Jimi's final song, a local reporter pushed through the crowd to interview Billy Ray. "Mr. Thompson," she asked, "what do you think of what you just witnessed?" Billy Ray's response revealed how completely the world had changed around him. "That wasn't music. That was... But he couldn't finish the sentence. Standing there, trying to dismiss what everyone had just experienced as not music, Billy Ray realized how ridiculous he sounded. The power and beauty of Jimi's performance was undeniable, and his segregationist arguments suddenly seemed not just wrong, but absurd. The next morning, newspapers across America carried front-page stories about the Nashville concert. The images were powerful. Jimi Hendrix playing his guitar while denied entry to a segregated venue. Thousands of people of all races united in appreciation for his music. And Billy Ray Thompson looking increasingly isolated and anachronistic. The financial impact on the Grand Ole Opry Club was immediate and devastating. Major booking agencies announced they would no longer work with segregated venues. Musicians refused to perform at the club. Advertisers pulled their support. Within a week, Billy Ray was facing bankruptcy. But the broader impact was even more significant. Other segregated venues throughout the South, seeing what had happened in Nashville, quietly began integrating rather than face similar controversies. The Nashville incident became a catalyst for the final dismantling of Jim Crow in the American music industry.
On March 22nd, exactly 1 week after Jimi's sidewalk concert, Billy Ray Thompson called a press conference. Standing in his nearly empty club, he made an announcement that shocked Nashville. The Grand Ole Opry Club is dropping its whites-only policy, effective immediately. We welcome performers and audiences of all backgrounds. When reporters asked what had changed his mind, Billy Ray's answer was simple. I heard the music, real music, and I realized that keeping people separated from music is like trying to separate light from the sun. It can't be done. Billy Ray invited Jimi to return and perform on the club's stage, but Jimi politely declined. He had already accomplished what he needed to accomplish. The barriers had fallen, and that was more important than any single concert. The Grand Ole Opry Club's integration marked the end of legal segregation in American music venues. Within months, similar changes occurred throughout the South. The Nashville incident became a case study in how cultural pressure could succeed where legal challenges had failed. For Jimi Hendrix, the Nashville confrontation represented something deeper than a civil rights victory. It demonstrated that music could be a force for social change, that artists had the power to challenge injustice not just through their lyrics, but through their very presence and persistence. Years later, civil rights historians would mark March 15, 1968, as the day segregation died in American music. The image of Jimi Hendrix playing guitar on the steps of a building that wouldn't let him enter became an iconic symbol of artistic integrity triumphing over institutional prejudice.
Today, the building that once housed the Grand Ole Opry Club is home to the Nashville Civil Rights Museum. A bronze statue of Jimi Hendrix stands where he performed that historic sidewalk concert with an inscription that reads, "Music belongs to everyone." Billy Ray Thompson, who lived until 1995, spent his later years supporting civil rights causes and frequently spoke about how Jimi Hendrix had opened his eyes to the power of integration. "That young man taught me that music doesn't see color," he would say. "It only sees souls." The story of Nashville 1968 remains one of the most powerful examples of how individual courage and artistic excellence can overcome institutional racism. Jimi Hendrix didn't just break down the barriers at one club, he helped break down the barriers that had divided American music for generations. If this incredible story of courage, music, and the power of standing up for what's right inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more amazing true stories about artists who changed the world. Have you ever stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult? Share your story in the comments below, and remember to give this video a thumbs up if you believe that music truly belongs to everyone.